Hey there, Legal Tea listeners. This is your host, Jenny Roselle. Welcome back for another episode of Legal Tea. Today we are on celebrity estate planning topic. And for today's episode, we are going to dive into what happened following the death of someone that some may not count as I'm saying celebrity in air quotes. But I guess this is my podcast, so I can decide who I want to talk about. So we're going to be talking about Warren Burger, who was a former Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. According to his Wikipedia page, he served in that capacity from 1969 to 1986. So quite the lengthy service. Now we'll get to him a bit more in a second, but every week when I sit down to prepare for future episodes, sometimes I struggle with what to talk about or who to talk about, and especially with the celebrity estate planning episodes. There's only so many websites that really bring to light celebrities' estate planning mistakes. So at times I feel like I'm running out of celebrities to talk about on here. I know there's no shortage, it's just finding the information. So if you ever happen to stumble across something, send it my way. When I was doing some digging, I found a website that had mentioned Warren Burger's estate. And I was like, why does that name sound familiar? So I looked him up and I was like, oh, yeah, I got it. I remember him. So for sake of my brain and for sake of getting this episode out there, we're going to count him as a celebrity today. And let's talk about him and his estate. And as always with these kind of episodes, we always start off a little bit about the person personally and professionally. So according to Warren's Wikipedia page, Warren hailed from St. Paul, Minnesota, which, hey, holds a special place in my heart. A lot of my mom's side of the family live in Minnesota, and there used to be a whole bunch in the St. Paul area. Not so much now, but nonetheless, big fan of Minnesota here. So as Warren was wrapping up his senior year of high school, he received a partial scholarship to attend Princeton University. But unfortunately, due to his family's finances, he was unable to attend. So he ended up going to the University of Minnesota. Later on, he ended up enrolling and attending St. Paul College of Law, which is now known as Mitchell Hamlin School of Law. And after graduation, he began working in law at a firm in St. Paul. And even a bit later, he started teaching at the law school that he attended as well. Shortly thereafter is when his political endeavors began. And I won't bore you with the beginning stages of his political career, but eventually, he was nominated by President Dwight Eisenhower in 1956 to sit as the U.S. Court of Appeals judge for the District of Columbia Circuit. And he served in that role until 1969, which is when he was nominated to the U.S. Supreme Court. So, for my little history buffs out there, like my husband, he's a big history buff. If you remember, there was a little bit of drama around this. So if you back up a year, in mid-1968, the current Chief Justice, Earl Warren, decided to announce his retirement, and the current president at that time was Lyndon Johnson. Well, President Johnson nominated a Supreme Court justice named Abe Fortas to be in the Chief Justice position. But a filibuster in the Senate actually blocked his confirmation, and President Johnson ended up withdrawing his nomination. So later in 1968, President Johnson was out as president and Richard Nixon was elected as the next president. So it was actually President Nixon, that's how Warren Burger came to be on the U.S. Supreme Court. He was nominated by President Nixon in mid-1969 and later confirmed by Senate to be the next Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. And he served, like I said earlier, in that role until 1986. And all of that according to his Wikipedia page. Now, I could sit here for a handful of minutes explaining all the big cases he was involved in, which he did, just FYI, I know this has kind of been in the news lately. He was part of the majority opinion on the famous Roe v. Wade case. So just take that for however you want to take it. But I'll let you go down that rabbit hole if you so wish. I'm going to stick to personally and professionally in his estate here. So he was married to a lady by the name of Elvira, and they married in 1933. Together, they had 2 children named Wade and Margaret, all of which are now deceased. Warren's wife, Elvira, died in their home in 1994 at the age of 86. His son, Wade, died in 2002 at the age of 66. And his daughter, Margaret, died in 2017 at the age of 71. Warren himself died in 1995 at the age of 87 due to congestive heart failure. So just to kind of help you connect the dots, he died after his wife, but before his kids. Now, shifting to his estate and estate plan, I can confirm he had an estate plan, specifically a last will and testament. And I say that loosely, kind of, because after he passed away, it was discovered he had actually drafted and typed up his own will, and it was only 176 words in length. Words, not pages, words. To give you some context, I've talked about this before on here. I script out a lot of these Legal Tea episodes. And right now, as I sit in this script, I'm about 2 pages in on a Microsoft Word document, and that's nearly 900 words. So if his will was only 176 words, it was probably like a paragraph, definitely not even a page. So that's just crazy. And to give you further insight, like the most basic will I do for clients is like 6 to 7 pages in length. So I legitimately cannot even imagine how so super basic his will was. One article from the Washington Post that is linked in the source links for this episode shared a few things regarding Warren's will that I found to be kind of interesting. First, it shared that 1/3 of his estate was to be distributed to his daughter Margaret, and 2/3 of his estate was to be distributed to his son Wade. I find it interesting it was not an equal divide between his 2 kids, but maybe that was something he heavily considered, and that's just the decision he came to. But there wasn't really much more out there on why it wasn't an equal divide, so I just found that a little interesting. The second thing the article shared that I found also interesting is that they described his drafting of the will as being done hastily, because in the section that appointed the executors, he actually misspelled the word executors. And it appears it was just a straight up typo, because how it's spelled would not even be how you would pronounce executors. Third, the article also shared that the will failed to deal with some really basic estate stuff. So, for example, it failed to give the executors the power to deal with real estate, which the executors had to request special permission from the court to get the power, which is just honestly unnecessary, cost and legal fee-wise, but it had to be done. It also failed to waive a bond, which is another very standard thing that is put in a will. The court does not set a bond. The court does not set a bond. Like, oftentimes, if there's not this specific request in a will that a bond not be set, the judge will actually set a bond on your executor. And the third and final slip up is that in my world, this is what you call a self-proving will. So a self-proving will is a will that you have when you have 2 witnesses sign alongside you. Well, Warren Burger's will was not self-proving, which that means it sounds like there weren't 2 witnesses that signed with him. So, these little things all create extra problems and extra headaches in my little estate world. And when honestly things create these kind of extra problems and extra headaches, you better believe that's more fees, because it's more work. Now, the final thing that is sort of a cautionary tale from Warren's will, which is an awesome follow-up from our last week's episode on estate taxes, is that a lot of people think Warren really slipped up and failed to do extra planning that could have been done to avoid paying or at least minimize estate taxes. Now, the Washington Post article estimated that Warren's estate would have to likely pay around $400,000 in federal estate taxes, and another $80,000 or so in state estate taxes, which at the time, I don't expect you guys to remember this from last episode, but at this time, Virginia had a state estate tax. But if you happen to remember from my last episode, Virginia today does not have a state estate tax any longer. But federally speaking, we are all subject to the federal estate tax. So at the time of Warren's passing, there was, of course, the federal estate tax, but Virginia at the time had state estate tax too. So like a true double whammy. And as we also discussed last week, there are lots of options out there that if state estate taxes are like a pertinent and relevant issue to you, there are lots of tools to do planning-wise through all sorts of different kind of vehicles like trusts, for example, to either not have your estate pay an estate tax or at least heavily reduce the bill. Though, like I said on last week's episode, it requires planning, which since Warren whipped up a 176-word will, not thinking there was a lot of time and energy devoted to this whole estate tax conversation. And I say all of that, and interestingly, as I continued my research on Warren Burger's estate and what happened, I found a blog post from Bridge Law, which is an estate and real estate firm in California, who actually said that all of what I just reported, which came from an attorney by the name of George Dodge, George Dodge actually wrote a piece for his local bar association journal on Warren Burger's estate. And basically the Bridge Law blog post said that, what George Dodge posted just kind of caught fire. But really, according to their post, what happened was actually all not too bad and maybe not bad at all. So their blog post shared, quote, "Many news outlets took Mr. Dodge's word as fact and went on to publish numerous stories about Warren Burger's foolish mistake, openly mocking his alleged incompetence. In all actuality, Warren and his wife, who passed a year before, did indeed take steps to minimize their tax liability. This is clear from Elvira's will, which Mr. Dodge said he did not consider," end quote. So Bridge Law took the total opposite perspective that Warren Burger did actually, through like him and his wife, did accomplish some estate tax planning goals. And honestly, for the sake of this episode, I thought it was important to share both sides and both perspectives. At the end of the day, there are really two takeaways from Warren's estate. Whether you believe George Dodge's position or Bridge Law's position, there's still two takeaways nonetheless. So first, let's not write our own will, okay? I mean, I guess he didn't handwrite it, he typed it, but even Bridge Law in their blog post agreed that this 176-page will could have been far more detailed to eliminate a lot of costs and fees that occurred just due to entirely how too simple it was. Second, whether you believe George Dodge, like I said, that, he reported that Warren Burger's estate got hit with significant estate taxes, or if you believe Bridge Law that said that Warren and his wife did do planning and did save money from estate taxes, at the end of the day, the takeaway on this front is this. Regardless, to be successful at estate tax planning, there has to be a proactive plan in place. Rarely, if ever, can something be done in the 11th hour to save estate taxes. Many families, when estate tax is like a very legitimate concern and issue, they do gifts over their lifetime. They do various types of trusts, charitable trusts. They all have to be done over time and not on your deathbed. So if estate tax planning is pertinent to you, be sure you start planning sooner rather than later because it can truly become too late. Alrighty, I think we're ready to wrap this episode up. Next week, we're back to a cautionary tale episode where we talk about real-life clients, real-life cases that I or my office have worked on. Always good stuff on those episodes, right? Next week, funny enough, we'll land on Halloween. So I was trying to think of, something I could do that was kind of extra spooky. I know since here on Legal Tea, we talk a lot about death and dying. I just wanted to do something a little bit different next week, and with it being Halloween. So we are going to talk about funeral planning and options that exist that my clients have done to ensure that your wishes are carried through. And I'll even share some kind of interesting things that I've seen playing out in terms of funeral planning. So tune in for that next week on Halloween, my friends. And until then, take care and be well.